Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Mustache himself, Cullen McFater.
Hello.
You're like
We have
you're
different names every time.
Hello. Is this me? Am I Mr. Mustache? Sorry. I have to. Well, before I get into Mustache, and I'm your other host, Mr. Clark Coffey. But no, Cullen, and it's a compliment because Cullen has this amazing mustache, which I know none of you can see. And the reason I call it out and I have to kind of tease him about it is because I'm actually jealous. I cannot grow anywhere near as cool a mustache as Cullen can. So it totally comes from a place of jealousy. Anywho, all right. Well, hey, with mustache talked about and aside, let's get into our film. For our 58th episode today, we are going to be discussing Cullen's pick, and I think both of our all-time favorite films, it sounds like, is Ridley Scott's 1979 film Alien.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
This is I'm surprised that I haven't suggested this earlier.
I'm surprised you haven't suggested it earlier either, especially when, we're going to get into it, but when you're telling me like what a huge impact this film had on you, and if you could, we're like 58 episodes in now. Granted, I think for the first 20 or 30, we focused on we had a different thing going on where we were focused
it was all Herzog,
on Werner Herzog, which is, for those people who haven't gone all the way back into our repertoire and listened to those, that's kind of how Cullen and I met, was in a Werner Herzog filmmaking class. And so that was kind of the origin story of our podcast. And so we were really focused on Herzog for the first, whatever it was, I can't even remember now, 20, 30 episodes.
Yeah, I think it's like 28 or something.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, a lot. And so I'm surprised that it's taken so long to get to it, but that's good. We've got a deep roster, right? So
yeah, we've got to be careful because I'm sure that both of us could go on for like 5 hours about this movie. So
yeah, we'll have to be careful.
We'll try and make this not the longest ever podcast episode.
We'll try not to. So let's jump in there then. With tell me about kind of what this film means to you when you first saw it.
Yeah, I mean this. It's like, again, I've got to condense this part of it too because I could just go on and on about it. But so the first time I saw this movie was I was probably in elementary school, and a friend of mine who I'm still actually quite close friends with today invited me over, and I guess his mom was always a really big fan of like Sigourney Weaver and these movies and things like that, and James Cameron, and we watched Aliens first. I remember I saw Aliens first, and I think the only reason that we watched Aliens first was because probably like AMC or something was doing a marathon of them, and they were recording them to like VHS, like the write-on files, right? Or I guess they weren't files, but recording the show to the VHS tape so we could watch it back. And so the first time I saw Aliens, I loved it. It's like a really cool kind of scary action movie and sci-fi and all that, and then I think like the next week he was like, oh yeah, my mom recorded Alien this time, so we can go watch Alien. So I went back over to his house and we watched. And again, these are like not official VHS, so they were the worst quality. Anytime there was anything dark, which there's a lot of in this movie, you basically couldn't see anything. Yeah. And the sound was all that like, lots of static in the sound and things like that. And but again, it kind of, I guess, goes to show that like we just didn't know really what HD was then anyway.
Of course not.
It wasn't like it didn't bother us at all because there was no relative comparison other than a movie theater.
Dude, I used to watch everything at home on like a 9-inch RCA black and white TV.
Yeah, black and white.
So
I had a black and white TV as well for a while. Yeah, and so yeah. I mean, and then I immediately loved them, and probably I don't know how many years later, but it stuck with me so much. And my friend, again, same friend Evan, stuck with us so much that when Prometheus came out, we went to see it together with a few other friends. And in high school, I remember we had this big film class, and we made this movie that was like a parody of Alien called the Nostromo, which is just switching the name of the ship from an N to a P. And that's where I got the production company that I run now is Nostromo Pictures. And so, of course, even in my professional life, this movie is abundantly, involved. And
can I just add though that like Nostromo makes me think of like an Italian dish.
Yeah, pastrami
like,
or something.
When I hear Nostromo, I imagine like, Mario or something. Yeah. Nostromo.
Like a nice little pasta dish or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and it's one of those movies that also like it's difficult for me to think of a movie that I have made, even if they're not horror movies, even if there's purely drama or whatever, that hasn't been somehow influenced by Alien, if be it visually or whether I'm stealing just a shot or something like that, or just the kind of and then there were none qualities of the screenplay. And I think that's another thing that really affected me about this movie is that I grew up loving Agatha Christie and Sherlock Holmes and things like that. And and then there were none is still one of my favorite books. And of course this screenplay and this movie really reference that a lot, not in literal references in dialogue, but everyone that is in all the behind the scenes stuff talks about kind of the Agatha Christie overtones of like the people going missing one by one and that sort of thing. So I think that it was right up my alley. And right up until the point that like my first feature that I did last year, the entire final 15-minute climax is completely based on Alien. I every time I was trying to describe it to someone, I would just show them a scene from Alien and be like, this is what we're doing, to the point that it's a slow dolly on the ground backwards as someone. So
what do you think, like, but when you were a kid, right? So a lot of this is in hindsight, right? Where it's like, okay, now you're a cinephile and a filmmaker yourself. But at the time when you were a kid, like what stood out the most to you? Like, was it like the creature design? Was it the tension and suspense? Was it the science fiction aspect of like?
It was just the like elements of just
Sigourney
the world.
Weaver in her underwear.
Sigourney Weaver, yes, yeah, the butt crack. I think the world, like, this is probably my favorite fictional universe of any movie. I'm not like a big franchise guy. I don't really like, I don't go into the Marvel movies. Even like, Star Wars, I think a few of the movies are pretty good, but I'm not a huge, I don't really like.
Yeah,
I'm not a like that type of filmmaker. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I will say that like Alien is something that no matter like what it is, if it's a video game, if it's a movie or whatever, a TV show, I'd probably watch it just because I really, really like the design of this world. It feels very rich. It feels very realistic where, you've got this corporation, the Weyland-Yutani Corp. I think it's just Weyland in this one. I don't think they put the Yutani.
Yeah, they add that on later. Yeah.
And it's like this, but they're not like outright antagonistically evil. They're just a corporation.
Yeah.
And they do the same thing that all corporations do, which is expend their, lower
ends up being ultimately evil, but that's a discussion for another.
It's a very realistic portrayal of like, corporate kind of lifestyle and things like that. And I think a very good and dire warning as to kind of the dangers of powerful corporations. But and so I just love the it's not as dour as Blade Runner, I'd say. Like, I like the world of Blade Runner as well, but I'd say that Alien, there's like a little bit more of a grounded sense, where it's like it just feels so incredibly lived in and real, and not necessarily like a future that is necessarily what we would get to, but rather I could see in some sort of alternate Earth, that this would be it just feels like it's a very well thought out.
Well, the character, I think that's, so that's, so we'll get into all of that, because I think that what you're describing in that art direction and production design and, some of the most amazing people that have worked in the field, and Ridley Scott himself as a director is one of the probably most production design oriented directors ever, certainly at his level of success. But for me, so I saw the film when I was very young too. I have no recollection of when I first saw it. I was 3 when it came out, so I definitely didn't see it when it first came out. It's possible, and I can't remember. I just can't remember. but it's actually possible that I saw Aliens first too, or saw Aliens very closely about when I saw Alien. I definitely have more memory. So when I was a kid, I think if you would have asked me, I would have said I liked Aliens better when I was really young, because because it's an action film, it's for a 13-year-old kid, it was so much more action going on in that film. You get to see the alien a lot more. There's guns and explosions and the like egg-laying mother at the end and the big mech fight. I'll just call it like a mech fight, basically at the end. I mean, it's just a lot more going on. But certainly as I got older, Alien became my favorite of the two. But to go back, so yeah, I was young too. I saw it probably on HBO or TV, something, for sure. And I kind of am in the same boat as you. The thing that really stuck out to me was the world that they created. I mean, I also am not a fanboy really of any other kind of cinematic universe, I guess, for lack of a better term. But I have always been intrigued by this cinematic universe. And I'm at least partially interested in every Alien film that's been released since. And there've been obviously some not stellar films made in the series, but even then I'm like, I can find something to enjoy if only it's like another little tidbit about this world. But I think that speaks so much to the density and richness of the production design and art direction of this film that it left so many avenues to build upon down the road for all the other stories that have kind of sprung forth from this first film. And it leaves it's just such a rich film. Your imagination just runs wild, I think. You can't help to.
Yeah, you want to know more about the world. And I think that's the thing, is that especially with this and Aliens as well, and I mean, I would say pretty much all the movies, is that they never, like, you never see too much of the world. So your curiosity is almost driven nuts, because you're just like, I want to know what Earth looks like. I want to know what, what is this corporate structure? What's this, what is the countries like,
And what you do see is so well put together. I think that's why you want to see more, because it's just so visually rich and so beautiful. But let's back up though for a second, and because I think the origin of this film is pretty interesting. So the story, and at least the screenplay credit goes to Dan O'Bannon. This is kind of like, I especially if you watch the really extraordinary, I think it's like 3 to 4 hour long making of documentary that exists for this film, and actually every other Alien film, at least of the original 4 films. You can really get a sense between, especially like David Giler and Dan O'Bannon, that there's definitely was some contention between the two of them writing of this story, But Dan O'Bannon goes way back to Dark Star, John Carpenter's first film, if I'm not mistaken.
Which sort of inspired, weirdly enough, because there's the alien creature in Dark Star
which is a beach ball. Yeah, so Dark Star is like a super low budget. It's basically a student film. It's worth seeing, though, I would say. I own it. I've seen it. It's worth seeing. It's pretty goofy, but it's kind of part of its charm. But Dan O'Bannon worked on that film. And I think, help me out here, but he went from that. Did he go from that to Dune? Do I have that correct?
I think so. From my understanding, he went from that to trying to get Alien made, and then when that was not happening, went to Dune.
Right.
But it wasn't Alien as we know it. It was quite a
totally
different
and that's
story.
Where totally different story.
And then so then he went to Jodorowsky's Dune, which
fell through.
Yeah, did not happen. Famously fell through.
But super important. While he was there, he met H.R. Giger.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think Giger was doing some design work for Dune, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, I want to call something out too. I just want to call something out real quick. I forgot about this when I first mentioned him. So, do you know where Dan O'Bannon's from? You know where he was born and raised?
Missouri?
St. Louis, Missouri.
There you go. So we've got a Missouri and we've got a Canadian working on Alien. There you go.
Hometown boy makes good. Okay, yeah. So I just had to, because not a lot of people in film are from St. Louis, Missouri. Anyway, so yeah, so he meets Giger. They do some work, and O'Bannon is blown away by Giger's work, which obviously is just, you can't overstate how vital his design work is on this film.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you just it's
there's nothing else like it.
Yeah. And so right, so I think he comes back and he's got the script, and who else did he work with? There was somebody else that he worked with on the script, and now it's Ronald Shusett, right? So those two, they're working on the script, and it ends up getting in the hands of the newly formed production company Brandywine, which is Gordon Carroll, David Giler, and Walter Hill. Walter Hill is the guy of those three that I know most about, or most of, like from especially his like 70s work.
Yeah, The Driver,
and The Getaway. He wrote a lot of stuff. He directed some things. Yeah. And Southern Comfort was actually the film that I think he went to direct instead of this one. So he kind of was slated to direct this film once Brandywine picked it up. But yeah, just to go back. So I think that's where like that, at least according to them, the three men at Brandywine were like, O'Bannon, I don't know, man. The script is not super great. They love the idea of like the chest burster, and that was like kind of the idea that really grabbed them. So at least according to them, they totally rewrote the script.
Yeah, and so what I understand about that too is that there was none of the truckers in space kind of. There was a bunch of different contentious kind of like tellings of this, but from what I've heard, is that the truckers in space stuff wasn't really a part of O'Bannon's script. That O'Bannon's script was a lot more kind of 2001-esque, where everything was super clean and science fiction, and they said we need the audience to relate to these characters, and so they kind of made them like these blue collar, tow freighter people that work in space and hate their jobs.
Well, that and that's huge, and I think that decision to do that, I think, speaks to how you're kind of use different language, but how it's kind of relatable, even though it's in this different universe. It feels grounded. It doesn't feel so removed. And I think, around this time too, a really important decision was made, just to try to like improve its like sellability, or that any of the characters' genders could be anything. And so this is where we start to have this flexibility where Ripley could be played by a woman. Of course, ends up being played by Sigourney Weaver, ends up being, sends her career into the stratosphere. And
very iconic character for her too.
Like super iconic character, yeah. So it's kind of like an interesting little bit of an origin story there. I'm always intrigued by this thought too. Ridley Scott only had one film under his belt before this. Now he did a lot of commercials, and his huge in commercials. I think he's still like scot-free, right? Or there's an arm of that's a commercial arm. Yeah. Like both he and his brother did a ton of commercials. Obviously, and Ridley Scott shot the 1984 Apple commercial, which is kind of considered
very
to be
famous one.
One of the best commercials ever shot. So he came from that space. He did The Duelist, and I don't know if you've seen The Duelist, but boy, I couldn't imagine a movie more different than this one, frankly.
Yeah.
So I'm always kind of, it's almost in a certain sense, it's kind of surprising that Ridley, you wouldn't expect the director of The Duelist to jump to Alien, first of all, which is interesting, then to have done such a great job with Alien, and then you look at how much Alien shaped Ridley's career after that. Yeah. It's just kind of, I just wonder, like, what, it's almost kind of a funny, like, parallel universe kind of thought experiment. Like, what do you think Ridley would have been like as a director had he never touched Alien?
Yeah. And he I'm pretty sure he also almost, after signing on, almost left for something else at one point. Not in production, but before production had started up. I think they had started kind of doing the pre-production, and then there was another offer, and he was like, well, if we don't get this underway within like a few months, then I'm probably going to go do that. Yeah. And I don't think it was like a threat, but I think it was more just like I don't really want to wait around for it. Yeah. And then something happened, and he ended up staying. But yeah, I think it's a good I mean, yeah, you can see this movie. It's in all of most of Ridley's work. I mean, especially he did Blade Runner a few years after this,
Hmm.
and you can see that like there's a lot of theories that they take place in the same universe, even, which I don't really think so, but
I
there have
don't
been like
either.
little references and jokes, but yeah, I mean, this is to me, it's a movie that really shows the power of production design,
Yep,
of
and art direction.
cinematography. I mean,
Yeah.
again, and we're probably going to compare a little bit as well with Aliens, just because they are kind of the two most popular, and there's a lot of people prefer Aliens and a lot of people prefer Aliens. So there's kind of a divide there. I also prefer Alien to Aliens, but I really do like Aliens.
Yeah.
But I think that that's one part of it that like, and I love the production design of Aliens too. But if you look at even just like the cinematography in Aliens, um, it's a lot more brightly lit. I mean, it's lit more so like an action movie, whereas Alien is purely horror in the way that it's Derek Van Lent did such a fantastic job in incorporating these lights and incorporating this kind of horrifying ship into the way that he lit every scene, and that every light is motivated from some part of this kind of technical hellhole, which I think is really, really fascinating. So yeah, I think it's just kind of incredible that Derek Van Lent kind of incorporated all of these. All the lights are motivated by the fact that the ship is this sort of industrial hellhole, and is very imposing, and it's very clear that all of these aspects of production, from the production designer to the cinematographer, the direction, to the costumes, every single piece of that was working in unison to create this vision. Which, I mean, that's not like a surprising or uncommon thing in the film industry, but I think it's uncommon for it to be done this well,
Yeah.
where you see, especially once the ship self-destruct is kind of going off and there's the yellow lights and all that. And you've got Sigourney Weaver kind of running through the halls with the flamethrower, and it's like it just is so clear that everything was so perfectly thought out in terms of like how this movie's going to look. I know Ridley Scott did some extensive storyboards,
Right. Right.
and so it's very clear that that from the get-go, when they were building the sets, when they were designing the light, when they were choosing the shots and things like that they had thought through all these things, which I think is really remarkable, and I think it is why this movie looks so good and feels so good and scary. Um,
Well, I mean, and just the caliber of talent they have. First of all, I mean, I think it's just a rare occasion where you have Ridley Scott, which of course he's proven himself to be one of the most art direction, production design oriented directors alive, working. He's so focused on the photography of a film. And I think he cast the right actors in this film to allow him to focus on that. I mean, and you got to remember too, at least according to Ridley Scott, this film originally had a budget of 4.2 million, and so like you said, he storyboarded the entire thing, which he does himself, and he's a pretty damn good artist, and he's able to storyboard quite well. He brings the storyboards in, and they double the budget on the film to 8.2. So this film was made on a budget of $8.2 million. And I think Wikipedia says 11. I think they're throwing in some marketing budget there.
yeah,
But
yeah.
even for 79, $8.2 million for a film like this is peanuts, man. And, so you've got Ridley Scott, you've got H.R. Giger designing not just the Alien, which of course is iconic. I mean, I don't think, there's hardly a person in the world, literally anywhere, that wouldn't recognize the Alien or Xenomorph design. You have Ron Cobb and Chris Foss doing other concept artwork. I think Ron Cobb did a lot of the like human spaceships and things. H.R. Giger did not just the Alien, but he did the alien ship, the space jockey, and
The planet,
the planetoid,
426, yeah.
and just and just H.R. Giger's designs are so kind of viscerally disturbing. It's such a strange combination of scary and sexual and bio.
And they really ingeniously kind of use the budget in the way that they design the sets too, where it's like,
Yeah.
the Nostromo, for example, is really just primarily two hallways.
Yeah.
It's the kind of like underbelly hallways that have the the grates and things like that, and then the upper ones that are all like kind of cushiony. But what they've done is they've basically had, it's almost like a U shape, so that you can film in all these different angles and make it look like it's 60 different parts of the ship, while simultaneously really it's just one one little hallway. And so once you've seen the movie enough, you kind of start to recognize like, oh, that's the exact same hallway she was just coming down. Now she's just walking down the other way. But it's still like, I think it's such a brilliant use of such a small budget. And like you said, like even in, adjusted for inflation and kind of the crazy budgets that movies get these days, this is still quite a small budget film. I mean, I don't have it right off the top of my head. But I don't know what Star Wars was made for 11 million. And so I think that, and I don't know if that, again, that's probably including marketing as well. But if you think about that, I mean, Star Wars, to me, the charm of Star Wars was that it does sort of seem low budget. It kind of had like a bit of a homemade appeal to it. Whereas this doesn't, the budget doesn't show in this movie at all. This feels like a movie that was made for, 50 million upwards of and I think, again, that is all down to the way that people use the budget and how Ridley Scott decided to use this money and kind of lead this movie to be really, really, really just fantastically efficient in its production. I think that's kind of a word I would use for it, is that it's incredibly efficient. It doesn't seem like there was much waste or excess.
Well, there certainly isn't in the storytelling, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's one of the things, is that, it's the story is really it gets right to the point, doesn't beat around the bush. It's basically a horror film, right? It's like the haunted house kind of, scary dark house movie. And but just imagine this exact same plot, just imagine this exact same story, but it's like no production design, boring alien design or monster design, and there's a million of these films. Every other horror film is this film without all of these things that we've already discussed. That really, and so it's, when I think of a film that illustrates to, if you're a fan of cinema, or if you're a wannabe filmmaker, or you are a filmmaker and you're looking, just kind of to be reminded of the power of the tools available to you as a filmmaker, looking at this film and just realizing how much story you can convey through production design and art direction is just mind-blowing to me. And so I'm always blown away by that. But so I think we've like talked about that. We could go on and on, like you said. We could make it such a long, but let's give a little love to the cast too, though, because if it weren't for the cast, if it weren't for these really like uniformly excellent performances, in my opinion, across the board, Ridley wouldn't have been able to focus on the photography and the production design. And I think that's part of his secret of his success, is that he cast really good people. He didn't have to worry about them. They gave great performances, and he was able to do his thing. It sounds like to me Sigourney Weaver's your favorite.
100%. I mean, actually, 100%. I've just realized that I mentioned Sigourney Weaver in our last episode. When we were talking with Faye Dunaway, and then I hadn't even planned to do this yet, but that's kind of because Sigourney Weaver. I mean, I don't know why Sigourney Weaver isn't in every movie. That was one of the notes that I wrote while watching this. But like, I don't know why and it's bizarre to me that for an actor of her caliber and how great she is in everything that she's in, that she, and I know she's in Paul Schrader's new movie, which is but again, like, I'm just really shocked that she's not in more.
Okay. I can see how you would want her to be in more, for sure. I get it. But, isn't she going to be in Cameron's like further Avatar films?
Yes, she is in those. Yeah.
So there's that. And I don't think you can get much bigger than that, right? That's got to be some of the biggest budget, most, but she's 73. So come on, you got to give her some time to spend her life, right? Um,
Yeah.
but I feel like I mean, look, growing up in the 80s, I feel like I remember her being almost everywhere in the 80s.
Hmm.
And maybe she slowed down, but she does Alien. Now before that, she had been in just a couple films, and I think it
Hmm.
had really tiny. I mean, I think her first film was Annie Hall. She's almost like a background or something, right? I mean, she's extremely small. And then Alien, as we all know, made her a star. And then Ghostbusters just a few years later. I mean, I remember that from my
Yeah.
childhood. She
Yeah.
was like, that was huge performance in that film. And she did,
And Aliens.
and then of course,
she was in the first 4 Alien. Yeah.
yep, and she was in the first 4 Aliens, and she's in Ghostbusters 2. And I remember going to see Gorillas in the Mist in '88.
Oh yeah, I remember
in the
Gorillas in
theater.
the Mist. Yeah.
I remember seeing that in the theater. So and she's Galaxy Quest is another one of my favorite performances of hers. I think that's in '99. I mean, she's and here she is. She did 2 films in 2022. She was in Ghostbusters Afterlife, which is, I think, just a cameo in 21. So she's around, and she's going to be in the next 2 Avatar films, but I don't know.
Yeah. And as I said,
gonna,
the new Schrader. Yeah.
that's going to be like the like CGI version of her. I guess it's like a mocap performance, is based, but
Yes,
still,
yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, come on, dude. She's 73. Maybe she's like she's.
I guess
tired.
what I mean is more so not.
No,
but
she's just
I'm
awesome.
surprised
Yeah.
that in the, like especially in the 2, like she just seems like she to
she's
me
great.
would be like a bigger than an Angelina Jolie or something, because she's just so versatile and such a talented actress.
And I think it's a credit to her. I mean, I just don't think that she's played that game. She's just not been the tabloid. I mean, look, she's been married to the same man since like '84.
Yeah.
She doesn't have all of these scandals and wacky stuff.
Apparently she's a joy to work with.
Yeah. So so I think that's a big part of why, she's just not on the cover of every, well, I don't even know if they really have Inquirer magazines nowadays. Now it's, Instagram and TikTok and everything, but TMZ. But yeah, I just think that she stays off of that stuff. But there's other really good performances here too. I mean, so one of my favorite people is in this film, and I think he's fantastic in it. I think he's fantastic in almost everything, and character actor to be sure, although he did have a lead role in Paris, Texas. But Harry Dean Stanton, you got to give it up to Harry Dean Stanton.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he's fantastic. Yeah,
I feel like Harry Dean was like 55 somehow when he made this film in '79, and somehow lived to 2017. I feel like he was already ancient in this movie. I kept seeing him in movie after movie after movie. I remember. So there was a I don't even know what you call this. It's a documentary film about a couple rock bands. That I think was made in the early 2000s, I think, called Dig. And it was a documentary that followed 2 bands that were like friends and then kind of had a falling out. And it was the Dandy Warhols, if you've ever heard of them, and the Brian Jonestown Massacre. Now, Dandy Warhols got pretty big and had a lot of hits, and so you might have heard of them. Brian Jonestown Massacre, maybe not so much. They didn't have as much commercial success. Anyway, so this documentary is following these bands around. They're in LA and they're trying to get big and everything. And I was so there's a scene in that film where there's just like one of the band members or one of the people at the party were just like filming everybody getting wasted right in this apartment in this party with these 2 rock bands, and the camera like pans by this bedroom. And Harry Dean Stanton is just sitting there partying with these people. And you're just like, dude is everywhere. He's like,
what the hell is he doing there? Yeah.
He's like 80 years old.
Yeah. That's hilarious.
Partying with these 2 like rock bands. And it was just so, it wasn't like he wasn't the focus. Nobody even like paid any attention or did or said anything. The document, you know what I mean? It was just somebody kind of panning the camera. I had to like pause it and be like, wait a minute. That's Harry Dean Stanton. Holy crap. But I don't know. I just want to say, I just want to give him some love because I think
he's great. He's fantastic.
He was amazing. I think he's amazing in this film. The guy is a legend, an icon. And so anyway, I
also love Yaphet Kotto in this.
Yep, he's great.
And of course,
Ian.
Ian Holm, yeah, who was this? He was known in England, but had kind of made him a name in the U.S. Tom
Yeah.
Skerritt, of course,
Yep.
Veronica Cartwright. There's yeah, I mean
John
it's one of
Hurt.
these
Did you say
cases where
John
you
Hurt?
just yeah, oh John Hurt as well, yeah. It's one of these cases where you just have these really, really, really talented actors, and you can just tell like during the dinner scenes and when they're just all kind of talking over each other, but they're just a really, really strongly performed cat, and shows you the value of
Well,
getting incredible performers.
I want to go back to Ian because I think his couple things here. First of all, I think we go back to the writing process. We talk about Dan Bannon and his the kind of the nugget in his script that got this film kind of on the track to be made
Hmm.
was that the alien like put an egg inside you, effectively like raping its prey, and then you would have another, like the alien would like explode out of you, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
But I think when Brandywine got it and they were rewriting it, that's where they introduced this idea of the android that would be on the
Yes.
ship, and
Yeah.
that was such a stroke of genius because the plot doesn't have a lot of mechanizations.
Yeah,
The
it's not a
plot,
lot of moving pieces. Yeah.
yeah, not a lot of moving pieces. It's super streamlined. But this one thing, though, adds so much. It
Yeah.
adds so much
Yeah.
texture, and it's such a surprise, and it's a surprise from such a different direction, right? Because you're focused on alien, 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 and you kind of get a sense it's like, okay, this is the corporate guy. This is the guy who's got his own agenda. He's not out there to like help or save the crew. He's obviously got an ulterior motive.
Hmm.
But when he gets his head knocked off, like when he tries to
And he's
kill
yeah.
Ripley,
Yeah.
and he tries to kill Ripley in such an odd and strange way. Did
Yeah,
that stand out to you?
oh my god, I remember
I,
me and my friend used to always do that with magazine, like not literally trying to
oh
kill
my
each other. But we
god,
used to
dude, that's
always
scary.
roll up it would be like
It's
anytime
so
you would fall asleep
creepy.
at a sleepover or something, one of us would roll
Oh,
up
oh my gosh, dude, it's
it
so
was like a big
creepy
joke
because it's
between
like
us. And,
it's not even an effective way to kill somebody.
no, but it's
in
just
like
so robotic.
in such a right, it doesn't make any sense. So
Yeah.
just for those of you who haven't seen it in a while, what he rolls up a magazine and like try to stick it in Ripley's mouth while she's
Hmm.
laying down. And it's like, well, she could still breathe through her nose, so it's not like
Yeah.
it's not in her throat, it's not choking her. And it just and it's funny because Ian performance, he goes from seeming like very human, right?
Hmm.
To seeming so robotic, like but it works. Like you
Yeah.
don't think and it's just, and when he gets his head knocked off, you're just like, I mean, I remember watching, like, that's something that stands out so much to me, and especially when they like reconnect him and he's talking,
Hmm.
and it's like all his blood is like that milk
The
stuff,
milk,
and
yeah, yeah.
and his voice has kind of got this effervescence like to it. They've manipulated the audio there, and I remember honestly that almost being like more creepy, and
Mhm.
that image sticking with me even more than the alien. Honestly,
Yeah, yeah.
I was just like, whoa.
No, and it's such a ingenious practical effect of just having to stick his head through the
Well,
table.
well, that's part
and
of it. But if
yeah.
you notice, they do have a mold.
Yep, they do,
Did you
because when
notice?
she's trying to put it up, yeah,
So they
yeah.
do have a mold, and it looks horrible.
It does. Yeah,
It
the
looks
cut does
horrible.
not do it justice.
No, and it's like you can tell they knew that it didn't look good, and they tried to
Mhm.
keep it on screen as long as possible, and they covered it with as much of that milk blood as they
Mhm.
possibly could, so you wouldn't notice. But I mean, and this is one of the things that happens on $8 million budget. Apparently, the story is that they had, obviously they took like a life cast, a real mold of Ian's face and head, and they over dried it or something, like when
So it just shrunk.
when
Right.
it shrunk, yeah, and
Yeah.
so it doesn't look anything like him. I mean, like
No.
not at all. But
Mhm.
but the film is done so well, and you buy everything else to such an extent that you don't even care. You
No,
know?
yeah, it's kind of just a little laugh, and then
You
but then
earn it.
immediately after, it's like, oh my god, this is
Yeah.
really uncomfortable.
I feel like the film earns it. It's like, hey, you know what?
Yeah.
You get like one area,
Yeah.
that, and in hindsight too, I think like there are a couple spots where the alien seems a little like you can see a little bit of the guy in the suit, in the rubber suit.
You can tell that the suit was not easy to move around in.
Yeah, and they changed
like especially
that.
I mean even in the when Dallas is in the vent, and it just I love that it just kind of puts its arms out. It doesn't really jump at him. It just kind of goes for a big hug.
Just puts but it's it's kind of like with Jaws, right? It's like with Jaws, the mechanical shark sucks. It doesn't work, so you have to show it very briefly. It's same kind of now this doesn't suck, don't get me wrong. The alien design is extraordinary. I mean, especially its head and everything. But it was like, well, it's a guy in a suit is how they had to execute it. It's not like they had CGI and they didn't have budget for a Stan Winston puppet and things, which I think is what they did in Aliens.
Stan Winston did all that.
Stan Winston worked on that.
And they had a lot more variable suits, flexible suits, so people could run on all fours and things like that.
Whole different thing.
But I think that it works in the movie's favor because I still think that of any of the Alien movies and the Prometheus movies and all that, this is still the scariest one of all of them.
And I think it's the best iteration of the face or of the head of the alien because it actually changes a lot.
Yeah, because Aliens, it's not as smooth, it's rougher. There's like almost a rib element to the head.
The dome changes and all kinds of things start to happen.
I think that this is definitely this is the scariest that the alien is in any of these movies.
Because it's the purest...
And I think it's also the benefit too is that it's got this like mystique and unknown aspect where people have no idea what they're dealing with. I think that's the part of the genius too, is that the alien, if you're actually watching the movie, the alien doesn't actually kill its first victim other than the chestburster scene until over halfway through the movie.
Right.
It's about, I think it's about 59 minutes when they're actually first going around and trying to find it with the net.
And is it Harry Dean that dies first with the cat?
Yeah, he gets he's in that big. But I mean, that's another element of production design too. Is just like that scene when he gets killed. Just like, why is there water dripping down on this spaceship?
Why are there chains? Why are chains
so unbelievably evocative and hellish? And it's really, really, really like. I mean, now I just always want to put make this movie. If there's one adjective for it, it's wet. Yeah, I mean, it's just everything, but it works so well. Everything's just so wet and has this. It's very textured and just grimy and gross, and I love that. It's just again, it just goes back to the whole production design and world building element of it, and it's. I mean, again, like we said, I'm not a big franchise guy and stuff like that. But if someone, and this is one of the things that I wrote in my notes, but if I was asked by some big studio, like what you can direct any movie you want, but it has to be within a pre-existing franchise, I would 100 times out of 100 times say that I would want to do an Alien movie.
It would be
because
fun.
This is just because there's just there's so much that you can do. I think that it's such a perfect blend where it's like you don't really need to add the horror because the idea of this universe is scary enough that it all just works so well together.
It would be tough. I feel like it would be really difficult, and obviously there has been a big challenge trying to follow this up because it's like, I mean, you imagine. I know it's like you can't really, but you imagine a totally like virgin, naive audience. You have no idea. You've not seen the alien. You don't know what its form is. You have no idea. And you've never seen any of this production design, the ships, the planetoid, none of this stuff. I mean, look at how compelling the film is to watch after you know everything about it, after you know what the alien looks like and what it does, all these things. And there's still so much visual density that it's so compelling to watch. I mean, now imagine watching this for the first time in a theater. You're an audience in 1979. You can't replicate that. There have been so many films now that have the alien or xenomorph, in it to some varying degree, right? And we all know what it does. That, what do you do with that? So it's like, as fun as it would be, and trust me, if someone offered me a budget and said, go make an alien movie, I'd sure as heck try. But boy, I would be really put to the test to think of how can I make.
Strangely enough, one of the best pieces of media, I think, from this franchise is, and one of the ones that actually used the elements of Alien, I think, fantastically was, and I have like video game consoles. I've played video games all my life, but I'm not really I wouldn't consider myself a huge gamer in that sense. I don't play a ton of them, but a few years ago, this game called Alien Isolation came out.
Oh yeah.
And my God, I genuinely think that that's one of the best games ever made. And they did something, I think they did something really smart, which is that it's the plot of the game is about Ripley's daughter trying to basically find out what happened to her mom.
No spoilers though. I've not played it.
I won't spoil it, but yeah, so she's basically, it's about her, which and that is something that I think is really smart because it's not something that feels shoehorned in. It feels like that would make sense as a movie and as a plot or as something a character would do. Of course, this character is going to be like, well, what the hell happened to my mom?
Yeah.
And what they did in the game is that you have all of the kind of aesthetic of Alien. You've got the massive ships that are dimly lit and industrial, but you also have those like cushy kind of very 70s looking, comfort spaces like the kitchens and things like that. And I've never seen a game based off of a movie that has better captured the feeling of, like, there's moments in that game where you're under a table and the alarms are wailing and there's smoke filling a room and you can hear the alien crawling above you in a vent and you have to turn off your flashlight and you got to hold a button to hold your breath. And it's like, I've never played a game that has better encapsulated. I've also, very rarely have I played a game where I've been like, okay, I'm going to put that away tonight because my heart is beating too
stressful.
fast.
Yeah,
but it's fantastic. And I think that it proves that there is still, a lot of value in that world. Whereas you see something like Star Wars or things like that, where it seems like they can never really get out of this cycle of kind of telling the same story over and over again. I think that there's a pretty nice, not backlog, but I think that there's a lot of things that if people were brave enough, if studios were brave enough to put the money towards doing some different stuff, which is ultimately what Prometheus was, right? I mean, Prometheus was something that had of course existed in the same universe as Alien and had connections of like that this was sort of a prequel that would lead to the events of Aliens. But other than that, it's got next to nothing to do with it. There's no alien creature in Prometheus. And yet I thought that one, when it came out, and I've watched it since, I still think it's not, a perfect movie by any means, and it's not as amazing as Alien, but I've always enjoyed watching it when I have. I mean, it's always a movie that I've been like, the world of this movie, the universe that this takes place in is just so fascinating that I'm kind of happy to watch anything or read anything or play anything that takes place in that setting.
I usually am too. I'm sometimes disappointed that the potential is not realized, but
yes, yeah.
But yeah. And speaking of potential being realized, I mean, I was surprised by this tiny little tidbit. We talked about how small the budget was on this film. Mm-hmm. It made $185 million, man.
Yeah, I know.
And back then, I mean, I don't know what that would be in $79 to $2022, but I'm gonna guess that's probably over 500 million. Easily.
Oh, probably. I mean, I'm trying to. What would the math be on that?
It's a total guess, but I'm gonna say at least 500, maybe 500 to $700 million. So, huge hit.
So it would be about 4 times, because $1 in 1979 was worth $4 today. So, yeah, it'd be over 500 million.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
It'd be
guess.
close to 800 million, which
Woo!
is.
Yeah,
that's
no
box
joke,
office blowout.
Man. Yeah, that's a box office blowout. Yeah, and I don't know what, I'd be curious to know what films it was competing with in '79, but and so it's no wonder. I mean that Ridley's career and Sigourney Weaver's career, especially those two, exploded, and that Alien became such a franchise.
And the irony too is that there's that classic story about James Cameron wanting to make Aliens and the Fox executives not wanting him to do it, having no interest in doing a sequel to Alien, and then he.
Wait, what was that story? I'm
well,
actually
so there's
not
there's
familiar with that.
this story about after I don't know why, since it was such a success, that they wouldn't have wanted to make a sequel, but for some reason
I'm surprised.
the Fox executives had no interest in doing a sequel to Alien. I think that they were worried that if they did a sequel, that the budget would just be way too big because it's a large sci-fi, and so when James Cameron did Terminator, they obviously were very happy with that and said, you can pitch us any movie you want. It just can't be an Alien sequel because you had been talking about how much you wanted to do one. So they gave him a meeting.
Had he written a script? He'd probably even already
Yeah,
written a script or a treatment.
And they said, they said, pitch us anything. It can't be an Alien movie. And so he went in to a boardroom with all these executives and wrote on the chalkboard or on the whiteboard, he wrote Alien and then put a $sign after it. And that's how it got the name Aliens, and that was how he pitched it, and they decided to give it to him. So,
interesting. What was the budget on Aliens? Do we know? I want to see that.
Aliens.
Let's look that up real quick. Because
18.5 million. So honestly, not that high either.
Yeah, that's actually not a lot of money.
And then let's see what it got in box office was 183 million approximately.
Oh, so actually less financially successful than the first.
Yeah. Which is interesting.
Is interesting. Wow. Huh. I wouldn't have guessed that. But I think it does kind of show how important it was that the idea was novel, that there were so many novel ideas, not in the story, but in these details of like the android and the alien type and how the alien would invade a person's body and burst out. I mean, again, we take all these things for granted now. It's like, well, duh. That the chestburster scene is one of the most iconic scenes in all of cinema, and the alien itself is such an iconic design. So yeah.
I mean, I think that would be in its favor, is that it's that Alien had this advantage of being totally groundbreaking.
And it's still a better movie. I love Aliens, but this is a better movie. Ridley Scott knocks it out of the park. He was in his prime. I mean, he was in his hometown in Shepperton Studios, and he just
people
crushed
always
it.
talk about how iconic all the lines are from Aliens, things like that, which they are. I mean, there's a ton of quotable lines.
Game over, man! Game over!
Get away from her, you bitch! Yeah, all those great. And
don't
get me wrong,
Paxton.
Aliens is a lot of fun, but there is nothing to me that sums up the feeling of these movies more than a low camera dollying backwards, looking up at Sigourney Weaver as she slowly walks through the hallway with a flamethrower, and steam juts out of vents beside her, and alarms go off, and there's the flashing yellow lights.
Can we talk about that? I want to talk about that for a second, because of course, every time you watch a film, especially one with so much visual density, you see new things. I was so impressed with the camera and how it moves in this film. Camera's almost never stationary. There's very few static shots.
Excellent mix of dolly and handheld.
There's a lot more handheld in this than I remembered.
Yeah, it's honestly,
and I think Ridley was operating for maybe 70% of the time that the film was being shot. Is kind of roughly what I've heard. But it's so beautifully lyrically moving. It's just it's never, if you notice, it's never just moving, or almost never just moving kind of on a single plane. There's always some kind of like flourish to it, that it's like if we're going to pan over to the left, it's also going to kind of like pull back at the end of that movement. There's always some kind of complexity,
or even just like the shots on a dolly in the hallway, and it you could just do a dolly shot in the hallway, but then it winds up wrapping around a corner for a second.
That's what I mean. There's like this. There's always like a little touch that makes it feel more organic, and that makes it feel part of the space that you're in and seeing. And it works so fantastically well. And it's I would have loved to, and maybe the DP here. Now again, we talked about Ridley. I'm sure Ridley had a lot to say about how it was shot, and he operated quite a bit even himself. But I would have, if the DP on this film, and it is Derek Van Lent, he's the Canadian DP. He only made a few other films. And I think the other films he made, he only did some special effects, like second unit type stuff or something. I think this movie Dragon Slayer, which was a 1981 film, I've never seen it. Was the only, and I think it's Lost Money. I think it was a Walt Disney film. Is the only other film.
He clearly had plenty of opportunity, because both Cameron asked him to do Aliens and Ridley Scott asked him to do Blade Runner.
Yeah,
So I think that yeah, Derek Van Lint likely just wanted to go into commercials. I mean, it
which
seems
is where he
like
came from, and that's
yeah,
Ridley Scott having come from commercials. He had actually worked with Derek. He
yeah,
pulled Derek to shoot this. And it seems to me, as far as I can tell, because he lived until 2010.
hmm
He just worked in commercials. I can only speculate as to why. Maybe he didn't like the long, strenuous shoots of feature films.
yeah, yeah.
I'm sure he was very successful. And look, you can make a ton of money in commercials. I mean, it's huge money in commercials, especially during their
Oh yeah.
heyday back
Oh my
then.
God. I mean, even now, I know a lot of people who are DPs who they do features for the artistry of it, and then they
Yeah,
do commercials to make money.
and it's the
And
actors can be the same way. I mean, that was like bread and butter. I know so many actors when I was in that game that would be your bread and butter, man. You'd go and you'd do a couple commercials and you'd make enough to live on, and then you'd go and audition for feature films and legit TV and everything like that. That's kind of gone away. That's a topic for a whole different day. But that's a lot of that has gone to the wayside as more
mhm.
and more commercials have gone non-union. I don't know what that's like on the crew side, but you know, anywho. But I guess the point is that I would have loved to have seen a Derek Van Lint shot Aliens. That would have been very interesting. But
Yeah,
but
yeah.
he and Ridley team up to really just shoot the crap out of this thing. We
Oh,
haven't
every
talked
shot is
about it.
just beautiful. Yeah.
Every shot is really extraordinary. We haven't talked about it, but I want to bring it up before we run out of time because I think it's a superb score. The music in
hmm
this is amazing. Jerry Goldsmith composed the music for Alien,
hmm
and it's like this is actually one of the soundtracks that I put on and just listen to for
Me
its
too. I write to this a lot. I mean, I
Yeah,
like there was again when I said at the beginning of the episode that I've stolen so much from this movie, and that like even when I did a movie 5 years ago that was like an experimental movie about the sun disappearing, and still wrote like an entire 10 pages of the script to Jerry Goldsmith's Alien score. So even
nice.
when it's got nothing to do with
Yeah,
aliens or sci-fi or anything like that, this movie somehow is still finding its way into my work. But yeah, that I think probably the only unfortunate aspect of the movie is that if you get, and I would highly, highly recommend getting the soundtrack. You can listen to it on YouTube. You can get it on Apple Music, or you can buy it.
yep.
But there's a really beautiful suite, like opening kind of overture that Jerry Goldsmith composed that isn't used in the movie, but it's really, really spectacular. And it actually, the cues from that were actually reused in Alien Covenant. I think that's the first time that they were actually used on screen in an Alien movie.
And you'll
Um,
have to get the complete edition just as a heads up
yes,
if you
yeah,
do want to. Yeah, so what you're referring to is the main title. So
hmm
that is not included in the original soundtrack, which is only about 30 some odd minutes long. But there is a complete edition that's been released, and that does have I think something like half a dozen or 10 like alternate takes that not
yeah,
just
and
for that main
unused stuff.
title,
Yeah,
but for some of the other tracks. Yeah. And it's interesting because you kind of get a little bit of a glimpse into um, how some of those ideas changed
hmm
at the direction of Ridley or Brandywine. But yeah, I think and there's so many different aspects we can talk about. But just because you mentioned it, that main title, the opening of this film is one of the coolest font treatments I've ever
oh
seen.
yes,
I and it's
it's inspired so much too.
what blows my mind is that we basically have like a slow pan across like a matte painting. It's all
hmm
it is. There's like almost nothing going on, but it's a really nice matte painting. And we have this extraordinary alien. The font is coming into view, and it's just
One
beautiful.
line at a time.
Yeah, and
I
it's
mean,
just
I've again ripped from that so many times too. Like the amount of times that I've been doing a title sequence or something, and I've been like, oh, you know what, I'm gonna have it come in, one piece of the text at a time, and
yeah.
and then it's really, there's so much iconography in this movie that I think people, because it's such a classic, that people don't really recognize
You take it for
how
granted.
inspiring it is. Yeah, and
Yeah.
how
Yep, I think it's an easy film to take for granted, and I think this just happens. It's like if you're the Rolling Stones, right? It's like,
yeah.
yeah, well, yeah, you're the Rolling Stones. Like, what could they do now? They've like, it's like you've made Alien. Well, okay, like, you just take it for granted. And so it's all these things that have kind of entered the social consciousness, entered pop culture and kind of just become part of who we are, that you take it for granted how extraordinary these ideas were.
Yeah, but I mean, again, from old Lego stop motion movies to high school movies to my first feature, I don't think that I'm ever going to stop watching this movie. I don't think I'm ever going to stop being completely enthralled by it and stealing as much as I can.
And I hope that they're able to go back and do something interesting again with it. Alien Covenant 2017, that was the last film in the series. There have been other things. There have been comics and novels, like you said, video games, which I'm going to have to check out. I actually own that Alien Isolation game that you've referred to, but I just haven't found time to play it yet.
Yeah,
but,
it's very, very good. I would recommend it, yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. But yeah, I mean, on that note, it was so fun to watch this movie again. I'm excited that you picked it. And I'm there's like this tiny little part of me that's like, should I choose Aliens next? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
One of the Herzog podcast or the.
Yeah. We'll just go through the whole series. No. But anyway. But yeah. Any other last words from you on this?
I mean, I'm just glad that again, this is a really fun one to talk about, so I'm glad that we got around to it.
Yeah, and I've really enjoyed watching it again. I'm gonna have to. It was just released, or not just, but recently released on 4K. So I'm like halfway tempted to pick it up on 4K and check that out. But anyway, well, thanks everybody for hanging in there with us and going along on our Alien adventure. We will catch you next time.
Yep. Bye-bye.